NASA has changed quite a lot. NASA used to be a small affair at my time. There must be less than 50 colleges, probably, maybe even less than that, maybe just about 30 colleges. I'm talking about 1975 to 80. And it used to be a small affair. And now the last NASA I went to was probably 2 years ago, and it's a completely different thing. It's not the same thing at all, and it's many more students, many more participants, delegates, whatever you call them, many more events happening, lot more activities happening, and a lot more people, invitees, experts, faculty. Lot more of that is happening, I suppose, because number of schools has multiplied so many times. So NASA also has grown that much more. NASA had started with a different aim. Actually, NASA, if I were to look back and in a way recall our attitude towards NASA, or our approach to NASA, or what we expected from it and what we thought of doing in it, was basically to do with the fact that architects are very few in number, and socially we had almost no recognition. Architecture as a profession, of course, itself had very little recognition, and schools of architecture had even less than that. So to begin with, all the students, and I think I would speak for many of my contemporaries, all the people who would find themselves in architecture schools at that time would in some way be people who were away from the mainstream, who had who were mavericks in their right, who in their own right, who had kind of ventured into a different field, and most of the time to the great opposition of their families, because either you had these two institutions, which were the University of Roorkee, that's what IIT Roorkee was at that time, or you had IIT Kharagpur. These were the two big institutions where you'd find a lot of engineering departments, and amongst them would be an architecture department. And, our intention was to gather more numbers so that collectively we could look like something. Otherwise, in various places we would be 30 or 40 people who individually as institutes wouldn't matter very much. So it was the fledgling profession, finding its feet. There were a lot of problems. Yes, the Architects Act had just come in, so there was some kind of idea that yes, now legally we have some kind of standing, but on the ground it wasn't so much. So our purpose was to get together at least once a year and share in some ways what our problems are of the profession, in terms of how the young architects are getting employed, what work they are going to do, and schools, of course, had problems all the time. Schools always have problems. So it was a platform for that. Now it's completely changed. The situation is actually reversed. Architecture is not unknown anymore. It's rather too well known, and so many people are wanting to become architects, and number of schools has grown, number of students have all grown. So now the question is different. That question which is there now was not really a question then. At that time, the question was not about where are we, what are we doing, is our architecture meaningful, those were not questions at that time, because that was just taken for granted. Of course, what we were doing was meaningful, and of course, it's going to help the nation, come up, and of course, we are going to make our cities beautiful, and of course, in all this, finally, we will also become successful professionals. That was all taken for granted. But in this 40 years since that time, we have seen that none of that has happened. So all the things which are of course are of course not. So if you are saying that yes, we are going to make our cities beautiful, of course not. And yes, we are going to be very important parts of this society, of course not. And yes, of course, all of us were going to be very successful professionals. Well, of course not. Very few actually become successful professionals. So now this completely changed. Now the question is about, of course, now. So now we have different questions. What are we doing right? What are we learning? What is it that we need to be learning actually? Is our work making an impact? So these kind of questions have come up. Are we in tune with society? Are we in tune with science? Is our technology up to date? Is our technology of building up to date? Is our technology of visualizing up to date? Is our technology of design up to date? What more can we do? And therefore, the amount of debate, the amount of discussion, discourse, the amount of hearing, listening, speaking that is required to be done is of a much, much higher order, much, much greater magnitude quantitatively, because there are so many more topics to discuss, and of course qualitatively, because now it's not just about getting there, but it's about getting there properly and well. That is the question. So in that sense, I think NASA has really, really matured into something which, yes, today it is of course a most unique organization. I cannot remember any other organization which comes close to it in terms of the sheer numbers of members and the kind of organization that needs to be done to put up a NASA convention. It's quite a unique event by itself. That said, one of the important things which NASA does now, and which is what was the intention right along, that it should be doing that, but now it's, I think, doing it better than ever, is connecting students. So if collecting students was the original intention, where we just needed to become a body, we kind of wanted to appear to be larger than we were by becoming a collective body. Now, of course, the numbers are big, so that's not a problem at all. The important part is that how, as a body, all the students connect with each other. How as a body, we are able to share knowledge, share experiences, share best practices, and just keeping abreast of at least whatever is going on in the country, if not abroad. So, while earlier, yes, there were many colleges which used to come together from different corners of the country. Yes, there were some North Indian colleges. There was Delhi, there was Chandigarh. In the West, there was JJ, SET, and all these. Many of the, you could say, senior colleges have distanced themselves from NASA. But still, what has happened is that now we have very strong regional outfits as well. So there used to be no ZONASA, for example. in that time because there was no need to. I mean, a zone may have maybe 2 colleges or 3 colleges, and that may mean maybe 100 students. Now you have Zonasa, which probably takes care of maybe 60, 80 colleges, and that maybe has 5,000 or 6,000 students. So the zones themselves are quite strong numerically, and zones have at this point of time, they have, while a lot of things are common, zones have their distinct they have their distinct identities, they have their distinctive problems of different zones. The problems of West Zone students might not be the same as the problems of the North Zone students, for example. So, keeping all that in mind, it appears to me that there is now a lot more maturity in NASA, and with that also comes a lot more responsibility. And NASA is doing a lot. Yes, there used to be the trophies and all that, and I think more trophies are now happening. But now, what is important is to steer all this NASA activity into a channel whereby this entire youthful energy which is there, and which is something which is only going to be held for that much time because students will come and go. So this whole idea of coming together, which happens, maybe it lasts for one batch before you were, and maybe one batch after you go, and after that you won't know any students. So this synergy which develops over that time, it needs to be harvested, needs to be garnered and put to good use. So it's important that apart from the long-term goals which you may have, it's important to have in some way some kind of projectified goals, the sense to have short-term goals as well, so that you can start something. Nothing of course happens just in 1 year, but maybe in a 3-year window you are able to do something very substantial. And keeping the unique nature of NASA in mind, the fact that there will be students all over the country, so any kind of project which requires a countrywide movement, which requires, it may just even be a data collection project, for example. It might be doing little things and seeing their effect in different places. So those kind of activities which require a countrywide presence, which NASA has. So the energy which is there collectively with so many students. How many members are there now? Of 62,000. 62,000. So we have 62,000 of the cream of people at that age in this country who are members of NASA, right? I don't think there's any other body like that, right? So it's important that now this body should take up tasks by which students learn by doing. So there were the early years when architecture as a discipline was getting formed in the country, when we were basically learning from the West. Most of our education was from the West because we had lost 100 years, had been wiped out from our education system thanks to Lord Macaulay. We were being forced to give up our vernacular traditions, forced to give up our indigenous ways of learning, indigenous discipline, and we started to learn back from the West. And in this 60 years, we have gone the whole circle. We've started off learning something, we reached its peak, and we have experimented, and finally we have learned that where all this fails, and now we are saying that no, this is not the right thing we learned. So let's go back and do what we used to do earlier. Here is the point, that's the inflection point, that's the turning point where we can find out for ourselves that yes, maybe a lot of things that we did earlier were very good and appropriate for us because they had been developed and evolved over a long period of time. But that last 100 or 150 years, when we had abandoned it, society and modern sciences technology has developed at a much, much faster pace than it had for all those years. So now is the time when we can actually take a very, very sensible call that yes, we tried that and we found where it failed and we had given up that. So at this point of time, what is the best that we can get out from all of this? So it's not just about going back and adopting what we had earlier. That's what the Renaissance was. That we just go back and simply import whatever was classical and just start doing that because that was so good. So yes, our classical was also very good, but at this point of time we can actually try it and apply it and see for ourselves whether that can be taken as it is or whether that can evolve further by input of all the technologies that we have today, right? So for this, the important thing to keep in mind is that we cannot afford another evolutionary cycle. Okay, we cannot afford to say that okay, let's try this and over maybe 2 or 3 generations, maybe 25, 30, 40 years later, then we will be able to know which is good and which is bad. No, why? By that time something else may have happened. By that time somebody would have come and said, no, architecture is not even required. Everybody can live in their own bubble. Who knows? So at this time we need to apply and learn. We need to really do things and learn. Okay? So our knowledge system, the one which we have been following so far, has taken us away from hands-on learning. And in many ways, hands-on learning has been kind of looked down upon. That if you work with your hands, that means you're not working with your brain. If you're not working with your brain, then you're brainy, then you're a laborer. That kind of thinking has come up. Alright. So that we need to get over. Because ultimately, what we do with our hands is what is our real learning. Right? So we have to get out of this idea that architecture is making drawings. Right? Architecture is not making drawings. Architecture is creating buildings. Architecture is creating spatial entities.